2 ships carrying 100 men and women, and 3 cargo vessels heavy with supplies entered Mars' orbit above Arcadia Planitia. For several days, the crews remained in orbit, checking weather, confirming landing procedures, and preparing for descent. Meanwhile, the cargo ships had already touched down, carefully placing habitat modules, solar panels, water tanks, and supplies across the Red Plains, ready for the settlers to claim and assemble. When the first landing module flared through the thin atmosphere, its heat shields glowing and parachutes snapping open, the settlers held their breath. Retro rockets roared to slow the descent, plunging them into Mars's infamous 7 minutes of terror. Dust swirled around them as they finally stepped onto the surface, looking out over the endless desert, breathtaking and silent, yet full of hidden challenges. Soon they would discover they were not alone, and the arrival of others would spark challenges that no training could have prepared them for. The first 4 astronauts had already prepared the ground for 50 people, but now the settlers faced a new struggle. With modules and supplies scattered across Arcadia Planitia, they had to find, drag, and assemble everything themselves. Each step a test of strength, patience, and cooperation. Within 2 weeks, inflatable habitats rose, solar fields spread wide, and oxygen and water systems roared to life. Mars was no longer silent. It was alive with human effort, endurance, and the quiet suspense of what lay ahead. At the heart of the colony stood Commander Voss. He had led the first ship of settlers, and upon landing, claimed command of the outpost, compassionate yet unyielding. He forgave honest mistakes, but carelessness could cost the colony dearly. On Mars, there were no second chances. From the very first day, Voss handpicked 30 settlers to form a consultation council. Every 6 months, half would rotate out, giving each colonist a voice in shaping their 2.5-year journey. But the council was only the beginning of life on Mars. Voss and his team built a culture unlike anything on Earth. The rule was simple: neglect your duties, and you earned less food and more work. On this unforgiving planet, that was punishment enough. Every settler had the choice to return to Earth after their term. But for those who stayed, Mars was no longer just a trial, it was becoming home. Commander Jonas Hale captained the second ship, bringing 50 more settlers across the void. On Mars, he became deputy commander, warm, approachable, a man who loved shared meals and music, making the outpost feel almost like home. But space is unforgiving, and Hale's warmth would soon face its test.
We're losing power!
Midway through the journey, the ship's engine faltered. Panic rippled through the cabin. Alarms blared. Engineers wrestled with failing systems. And minutes stretched like hours. For a heartbeat, even Hale faltered. Then, with a thunderous roar, the engine sprang back to life. Relief swept through the crew. But the moment left its mark. Hale had been under pressure, briefly, humanly. Settlers found comfort in his calm presence. Yet it was Voss's unshakable resolve that kept the colony sharp and alive. Mission Control soon relayed surprising news to Voss. A small Chinese crew had landed, taking shelter in lava tubes and relying on advanced robots to handle much of their work. Not long after, another update arrived. The Russians, using some of the Chinese technology, had established a base at the North Pole, where vast snow deposits promised water, but the extreme cold threatened both settlers and their fragile crops. The reports stirred mixed feelings. Competition seemed inevitable, yet there was comfort in knowing his crew was no longer completely alone on Mars. Life on Mars quickly shifted from survival to building a community. The settlers, veteran engineers, young scientists, and farmers worked tirelessly, coaxing crops from alien soil, maintaining equipment, and keeping habitats running. Most slept in crowded bunks, while couples were granted rare private modules, fragile bubbles of intimacy in a world built for efficiency. Days were long, nights restless. Equipment checks began at dawn, construction and rover missions dominated the daylight hours, and shared meals and flickers of music offered brief respite under the Martian sky. Every task carried weight. Every success strengthened the fragile bonds holding the colony together. Mars tested them at every turn, yet human ingenuity and cooperation kept the settlement alive and moving forward. While their new habitats took shape, deep in the Martian soil, a reactor hummed steadily. Pipes snaked into the thin, red air, drawing in carbon dioxide. Inside the chemical plant, hydrogen, produced from water extracted from underground ice, reacted with the Martian CO2 in a process called the Sabatier reaction, creating methane fuel for rockets and water for the settlers to drink, breathe, and grow crops. The water could then be split again into oxygen and hydrogen, forming a self-sustaining cycle. Survival on Mars was a battle on every front. Food, water, shelter, even the sky above. Over 300 meteoroids struck the planet each year. Most burned away, but enough reached the ground to threaten fragile habitats. Then came the virus, non-fatal but fast-spreading, slowing the colony for weeks. Coughs echoed through thin-walled habitats. Families stayed in their modules, afraid to visit neighbors. A girl pressed her hand to the plastic divider, her father on the other side in quarantine. For weeks, the colony felt more fragile than ever. A vaccine from Earth was out of reach. Commander Voss didn't panic. He built labs, drove genetic research, and sought ways to shield his people from Mars' unyielding radiation. Voss also sent teams to explore the surrounding terrain. Scientists and geologists scoured the plains and rocky outcrops, hunting for vital minerals and scouting land for the waves of settlers expected every 2.5 years. Sometimes Voss went with them, traveling far from base for days or even weeks, testing both the land and the endurance of his crew. During one of these missions, they encountered other humans for the first time. On the rugged plains near Arcadia Planitia, Commander Voss's rover crested a ridge and stopped cold. Another expedition was already there. Chinese colonists, scanning rocks with their instruments. The thin Martian air seemed to tighten. Voss raised a gloved hand. Geological survey. No weapons, no trouble. The Chinese officer hesitated, her team visibly armed with light equipment. Same purpose, she replied, calm, but edged with caution. The two groups studied each other in silence. Words were few, but suspicion hung heavy in the dust-filled air. Voss gave a nod. The officer returned it. Both knew this was only the first meeting. Trust, if it came at all, would take far longer than a greeting. After the encounter, Commander Voss gathered his team in the rover. "Observe carefully," he said, scanning the distant surveyors. "They are deeply rooted in tradition, passing their ways from one generation to the next. It will take time, perhaps decades, for them to think like Martians, to adapt to life that demands flexibility, long-term planning, and shared survival over legacy." He paused, letting the thought settle. The Western colonies are quicker to innovate, to adapt, to take risks, but even they will face challenges that make cooperation unavoidable. One day, all settlements on Mars will align out of necessity. The Chinese will be the last to join, but when they do, their discipline and resilience will make them formidable allies. After returning to base camp, Voss called an emergency council meeting. Arguments rose and fell under the dome lights. Scientists, engineers, farmers, each staking their claim. Voss often sat in silence, listening. When he finally spoke, the room hushed. From this meeting came the first Martian charter. Voss rejected Earth's short-term politics. Leadership terms were set at 15 years. Commanders, not rulers, so decisions could look to the horizon, not the next election. Every commander would be chosen by the council and could only be removed by a 3/4 majority. Stability, he insisted, was survival. Historians would later call this charter even more influential than the Magna Carta. Migration was also tightly controlled. Just as the first settlers had been carefully screened, so would all who came after. Only the best minds and the strongest characters could join, even under private ventures. Voss knew that without such safeguards, opportunists could unravel Martian society. Yet even as the charter was approved, subtle tensions lingered. Differences of opinion, rivalries, and personal ambitions simmered beneath the surface. Voss sensed that one misstep could ripple through the colony, testing the fragile trust that kept life on Mars from unraveling. In time, this strict stance on migration would spark one of the most significant conflicts between Mars and Earth. But for now, the rules were clear, and the colony had a fragile sense of order. After hours of intense discussion, the council approved all the points Commander Voss had presented. The tension in the chamber eased, and a ripple of relief passed through the settlers. One young engineer grinned. "You know, Commander Voss, in a few hundred years, historians might remember you as some kind of demigod." A biologist added, "Yes, they'll say your eyes could shoot laser beams, carving tunnels through Martian rock." Laughter spread. Another colonist chimed in, "Or that every time you stomped your boots, underground water sprang up." The room erupted, and someone shouted from the back, "And meteoroids!" They wouldn't dare hit Mars while Voss was around. Even Voss laughed along. "If that's the legend," he said with a grin, "make sure it says I got people to clean the solar panels every morning. That's the real hero work." The chamber burst into genuine laughter. For a moment, Mars felt a little lighter, its endless red plains. Not so heavy after all. Yet beyond the warmth of the council chamber, the planet's harshness waited. Somewhere on the plains, an exploration team was pushing the limits of their rovers, and Mars, ever unpredictable, was about to remind the settlers that survival was never guaranteed. Exploration was a routine part of life on Mars. Every week, small teams drove out in rovers to study rocks, collect soil samples, and map the land for future expansion. These missions were dangerous, but necessary. They gave the colony the knowledge it needed to survive. One morning, a rover carrying 4 settlers rolled across the dusty plains of Arcadia Planitia. The sky was pale orange, and the crew chatted as they drove, storing mineral samples in the back. Everything seemed normal. Then, disaster struck. Without warning, the ground gave way beneath the rover's wheels. The vehicle tilted forward and dropped nose first into a hidden ravine. A crack in the ground, covered by loose sand. Metal screamed as it slammed against the rocks. Solar panels bent. Alarms blared inside. The crew was shaken, but alive, trapped at the bottom of a narrow pit. They immediately sent a message to base camp. Rover immobilized. Oxygen systems damaged. Request urgent rescue. At base, Commander Voss sprang into action. A rescue team was launched within the hour, but nature intervened. A powerful dust storm swept across the plains, filling the air with red haze and cutting visibility to almost nothing. What should have been a one-day journey stretched to 2.5 days. Inside the stranded rover, conditions grew desperate. The storm blocked sunlight, leaving the solar panels useless. The crew switched to their small nuclear backup, but by the second day, even that faltered. Heat inside the rover dropped close to freezing. Frost crept across the windows. Oxygen reserves ran dangerously low. Every breath had to be measured. The 4 settlers clung to life. One fainted from lack of air. Finally, on the 2.5 day, headlights pierced the storm. The rescue convoy had arrived. Engineers worked quickly, lowering cables into the ravine and using heavy winches to drag the crippled rover back to the surface. With a final groan of metal, the vehicle was freed. The crew, weak and barely conscious, was pulled into safety. Against the odds, they had survived, and from that day on, the lessons of the ravine would shape every exploration mission. The incident shook the colony. At the next council meeting, Commander Voss stood before the 30 representatives. His voice was calm, but firm. "We cannot let this happen again," he said. "On Mars, one failure cannot put 4 lives at risk." The council approved his plan without debate. From that day forward, no exploration mission would leave the base with a single rover. 2 rovers would always travel together, one to rescue the other if trouble struck. And above them, small drones would hover, streaming real-time video back to the colony. "These are not luxuries," Voss said. "They are lifelines. Mars will test us again, and when it does, we must be ready." The settlers agreed, but the accident had done more than teach lessons in survival. It had planted seeds of doubt. For the first time, whispers spread through the habitats. Some questioned whether Commander Voss's strict leadership had pushed the explorers too far. And in the shadows of the council chamber, those whispers began to circle a dangerous idea. Perhaps the colony needed a different kind of leader. Late one evening, they came to Hale's quarters. Their words were careful, tempting. "You understand people better. They trust you. If you step forward, you'd have our full support. Together, we could make this place less of a military camp and more of a community." Hale listened quietly. Then he smiled gently and shook his head. Voss kept us alive when we first landed. He kept discipline when fear threatened to break us. Without him, none of this would stand. You think Mars will forgive us if we start playing politics? Out here, a crack in unity is as dangerous as a crack in the dome. I won't be part of that. The group fell silent. Shame replaced their bravado. Within days, word of their attempt reached Voss. Many expected a harsh response: demotion, punishment, or exile from the council. But Voss surprised them all. At the next meeting, he stood before the 30 settlers. His voice was calm, yet iron. Mars conspires against us every day. The storms, the cold, the radiation, all want us gone. We cannot conspire against ourselves too. Dissent is welcome. Opposition is necessary. But whispers in the shadows, that I will not allow. The chamber fell quiet. Slowly, one of the dissenters raised a hand and spoke, not in defiance, but in honesty. Others followed. By the meeting's end, the colony felt stronger. Not because everyone agreed, but because they had chosen unity over ambition. Life on Mars was never steady. It lurched forward in fits and starts. Each crisis, small or great, threatened to unravel the colony. One evening, an alarm pierced the habitats. An oxygen generator had failed. Backup systems gave them just 72 hours. Engineers scrambled, stripping parts, patching damage. Hands trembled as the hours bled away. Inside the council chamber, debate flared. Should they ration oxygen and risk panic, or keep the danger hidden? Voss held the line with iron discipline. Hale pressed for honesty and compassion. In the end, the generator limped back online. Barely, but the scare left its mark, a reminder that survival was fragile, desperately fragile. Not all threats came from machines. Some came from the human heart. Under pressure, one settler cracked. He hoarded rations, skipped duties, even tampered with equipment, not out of malice, but from isolation, from despair. His actions endangered lives. The council wrestled with his fate. Voss demanded accountability. Hale urged empathy. The compromise, harsher duties, closer watch, not exile. The message was clear. Mars would not carry passengers, but neither would it abandon its own. And then came the Watchers. Mission Control reported distant colonies expanding. Soon after, unsettling signs appeared. The buzz of drones just at the edge of radar. The flash of glass, a telescope catching light on a ridge. Figures glimpsed through the dust, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. They were not alone, and they were being watched. Voss refused to ignore the threat. He ordered forward outposts, small, fragile posts of humanity. Young volunteers stood watch. No weapons, only determination. Their presence sent a message. The colony was alert, unyielding. Every crisis, oxygen failures, broken tempers, eyes watching from the plains, kept the settlers on edge. Mars offered no mercy. The storms, the cold, the silence, all conspired to test them. And yet, with every trial they endured, Mars had been watching in silence. The long nights of suspicion, the quiet tension between colonies were nearing their end.
We must unite for the future, embracing innovation and a shared vision.
Voss had often warned of this day, a day when the red planet itself would force strangers to stand together, when mistrust would give way to necessity. That moment was closer than anyone imagined. One devastating incident would shatter the walls between colonies and awaken something new, not unity, not yet, but a fragile spirit of cooperation, born not from choice, but from survival. As if Mars itself whispered, humanity will endure, only if you reach for one another in the dust. How that single crisis changed everything. How rivals became reluctant allies will be the story of our next episode.